The story of kids investigating mysteries in a small town in Midwest America. A secret underground testing facility creating all kinds of anomalies. The 1980s? Strange things affecting everyone in one way or another. It all sounds pretty familiar when you look at it all on paper, but Amazon Prime's new show, Tales from the Loop, is the media giant's more existential answer to Netflix's biggest hit, and we're here to show you just how the revisionist historical tale of 80s Ohio both differs from and even sometimes surpasses Stranger Things in its inaugural season.
What do you do?
When someone says something's impossible, I prove it's possible.
Tales from the Loop is part of a book series created and designed by concept artist extraordinaire Simon Stålenhag, mostly centered around grounded sci-fi elements such as time travel, artificially intelligent robots, and, well, 80s and 90s kids roaming the countryside. Now, you may be familiar with Stålenhag's work if you've ever traversed Reddit, Tumblr, or Imgur, but the work you may be familiar with the most is his beautiful chromatic feast in No Man's Sky, having done the concept art and game covers for the company at launch. Since then, however, he's been finishing his books, working with the likes of Matt Reeves of The Batman, creating an RPG that is most excellent, and most recently adapting his books for TV. The man's been busy. A slight deviation from Stålenhag's Swedish-inspired work, the show is depicted as a brutally honest portrayal of an 80s-era town called Mersa in the great state of Ohio. Much in the same way the show Chernobyl depicts workers lining in and out of work in monotone grays and browns, the dreary and drab look of Mersa is almost in stark contrast to the similarly toned but albeit brighter town of Stranger Things' era-adjacent Hawkins, Indiana. There aren't too many callbacks to nostalgia bait products like specific toys or video game consoles, though I'm sure those have their place in here as they did in the books. But instead, what Tales from the Loop succeeds at is giving you a sense of the 80s, whether through architecture or electronics. But what the show really excels at is not necessarily beating you over the head with it all. Much like in Stålenhag's artwork, the extra amenities are simply a little flavoring on the aesthetic meal of the show, a byproduct of the Loop's technological advancements sitting like simple set decoration on a mantle. It has function and form, sure, but it's never at the center of the story until it absolutely has to be. Even the robots sit in the background until, I'm assuming, they come into a larger part of the overall story arc. That's all to say, this show could nebulously take place in the 80s or even in the early 90s, and I wouldn't be the wiser, save for how the aesthetic makes you feel. Which brings me to my next point. Let it be known, this show is trying to break your heart. It's not all sci-fi concept work intermixed with monsters and semi-forced references to movies and TV from the past. And while all of that is cool and fun and makes for entertaining TV, Tales from the Loop's question here seems to be, what is the human element in the midst of all of this technology? In the trippiest ways possible, the show tries to ask pertinent questions about our humanity and what each personal relationship means to us. Whether it be the death of a loved one, the fantasy of lust for another, or even trying to make sense of our own childhood and whether what we experienced as kids was real or made up and how that shapes us as adults. This show is a heavy load on our hearts that doesn't just challenge us to ask what does it mean to be human, but how do our own experiences affect those who surround us. And while Stranger Things does an excellent job of creating a shared experience amongst a small group of Hawkins inhabitants, I'm a bit partial to the structure of each individual character getting their own small tale in their own personal way and falling down each person's little rabbit hole. From the get-go, Tales from the Loop sets up the theme of the show with Russ Willard, played by the incomparable Jonathan Pryce, telling us, quote, "Everyone in town is connected to the loop in one way or another, and you will come to know many of their tales in time," unquote. Such as to say, this is gonna kinda sorta be an anthology series, but also not completely. The best way I could put it is Tales from the Loop feels like if you married Stranger Things and Black Mirror and they had a little grounded sci-fi baby, but with beautiful music by Philip Glass. Yeah, that sounds about right. Anyway, the idea here is that each episode is supposed to feel more conceptual and thematic rather than one long storyline. Each character seems to have their own adventure they go on, and each tale seems to show either the consequences of their actions or a lesson learned from their experiences. But it's not completely divorced from a through-line structure a la Stranger Things. We see the same characters, we stay in the same timeline, save for some interdimensional shifting here and there, and the one thing holding both the town together and tearing it apart is the secretive facility on the outskirts of town performing secretive scientific experiments that may or may not be detrimental to the inhabitants. The biggest difference here is that those who are performing said experiments aren't necessarily the bad guys this time, even going so far as to show how dedicated they are to their craft. Now, I get it, and as I've stated before, I love the show, but one of the sillier elements to Stranger Things that seems to be getting further and further away from itself is the sci-fi aspect of the show. I'll buy interdimensional travel up to a point, and I'll buy Demogorgon-like creatures from said dimension, but as a sci-fi geek myself, I want to see something a bit more, well, tangible. This is sort of what Tales from the Loop achieves here. While it's all still fantasy in the grandest sense, the sci-fi seems to really take its notes from noted sci-fi conceptualists such as the likes of Isaac Asimov and Gene Roddenberry. Mix a little Ralph McQuarrie in there and you've got Tales from the Loop. Its slower paced, more methodical approach to science fiction is a welcomed addition to this overbloated world of content media. What Stalinhog and writer Nathaniel Halpern of Legion and Manhattan fame accomplishes here is just how real and authentic the sci-fi feels. Yes, there are robots, cybernetic arms, floating ships, and miniature black holes, but placing it in a small town where each individual can face their own consequences of interacting with the Loop's creations makes it feel alive and purposeful, if not entirely mythological. In one particular episode, there is a sphere that seemingly holds the echoes of time, and if you yell into it, each resounding echo will tell you just how many decades you have yet to live. A beautifully tragic way of encapsulating the whole tone of the series like I've never seen, and when our characters interact with these sci-fi elements, there are grave consequences to each. Mostly conceptual, philosophical explorations of science fiction, but with heart, meaning, and generating wonderful character arcs.
Tales from the Loop is a genuine cinematic experiment. I really feel like it's a film lover's television show.
Now, I don't necessarily want to hold your head above the metaphorical water here and force you to watch this show. That's your right to choose. But what I can tell you is that after only watching 3 one-hour-long episodes of Tales from the Loop, I'm excited to finally watch something that has the same nostalgic effect of Stranger Things, all while getting an entirely new experience tonally. It feels like a self-actualized dream come to life. Is it slower? Sure, but no slower than Blade Runner. And I have no doubt that once an audience not already acquainted with Stalinhog's books or games bite their teeth into this one, that they'll find something to love and cherish about a show that challenges its audience with thought-provoking elements and themes. Stalinhog's work has already created a sort of bevy of inspiration for a new generation of creators, even getting the attention of the Russo brothers for an upcoming project, and inspiring certain other creators as well. Shameless plug. Excuse me. But what do you think? Will Tales from the Loop follow the book's meteoric rise and become a new streaming favorite? Or will it go silently into the night as so many other streaming shows have done in the past? Is this up your alley, or does this one get the cold shoulder? Sound off in the comments below. And for more sci-fi related content, check out what we thought of Season 2 of Altered Carbon and what exactly is happening with the High Republic. And for everything else, keep it here at IGN.
Everyone is connected to the loop in one way or another.